Well, welcome all to the Shifting the Mindsets in Spatial Computing and XR panel. As you can see, we have a very lively and hopefully engaging uh, list of panelists that are scheduled to bring you the very best and to help continue to lead the narrative on shifting the mindsets. So as we begin, I want to start to set the context that as the world grapples with the unprecedented circumstances surrounding COVID-19 and the global pandemic, it also presents an opportune time to actively address the human-centered side, the human side of what's been brewing beneath the surface of our very existence. The impact and the dire consequences of the lack of inclusion, equity, and accessibility in all facets of our lives. So when we look at the tech industry, we see that it's kind of blindly obsessed, right, with continuing down that rabbit hole of creating the next best killer app in the extended realities, VR, AR, and in between. So oftentimes, it dismisses the big picture that extended reality is a human journey, and it brings along the human-centered challenges. So the same biases that we see displayed in the headlines covering the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, those cases are in fact the same biases that go into data sets and moderation tools that put people of all color and historically marginalized populations at risk in the immersive environments as well. So in this panel, CyberXR Coalition and the XR Safety Initiative discusses that unique approach to helping build safe and inclusive environments in XR and cybersecurity, while shifting the mindsets to create awareness on these very issues and to draw a baseline via standards and frameworks to potentially provide solutions coupled with strategic collaboration. So with that, my name is April Boyd-Noronha, and I serve as the Global Diversity and Inclusion Advisor for the XRSI. And I want each of our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves as well, starting with Sanchari.
So hello everyone. Hi, my name is Sanchari and I am a global privacy advisor for XRSI. And I'm also an assistant professor at University of Denver, and I work on the user side of privacy and security. And my aim in being included as a part of the XR Coalition as well as XRSI is to promote the human side. And as April correctly mentioned, it's a human journey. So I work into looking into the new age technologies, but how we can address the concerns from the human perspective and protect their experience as well. So I'm very excited to join this panel and to start the discussions. But yeah, hello everyone.
And Joel?
Oh, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Joel Scharlat. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Super excited. Looking forward to the conversation. I have to apologize if anybody sees anybody walking what looks like on my shoulder right there. Our building's under construction here, building out some labs. But my day job, I'm the Director of Operations for Bytes Foundation. We're a nonprofit based out of Stafford, Virginia. We focus on education, innovation, and outreach, primarily around cybersecurity. The construction that guy's walking on my shoulder for is really around the labs that we're building up on the second floor, building 7 or 8 different great emerging technology labs, of which we're including AR and VR labs in there. Personally, my focus on XR has really has stemmed from my thesis work I did at the Naval Postgraduate School, where I looked at how you can use immersive technologies to influence people's behaviors. And I'll talk a little bit more about that today, or hope to talk a little bit more about that today. So thank you for the opportunity and looking forward to the conversation.
Great. And Rodrigo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rodrigo Tamellini. I'm co-founder and CEO of GamerSafer. We are a company based here in Silicon Valley, California. And our mission is to scale safety to millions of gamers through the games they love. We are a startup and a proud partner of XRSI initiative for about a year. And basically our path in this challenge is how can we leverage preventive solutions to the gaming ecosystem. And of course, AR and VR are pretty strong on that. So we basically use computer vision and AI to improve context around players. And with that, improve the preventive scenarios, leveraging safety to millions of players. And it's a great pleasure to be here sharing the stage with you guys.
Last but not least, Alina.
Hi everyone, I'm Alina Katovsky, a product designer, WebXR developer by day, and director of communication and chair of the user experience, accessibility and safety working group with OpenAI Cloud, as well as we are one of the founding partners of CyberXR Coalition. So quick short about what we are about. So we are the OpenAI Cloud, our global nonprofit organization with the mission to drive the development of open and interoperable spatial computing technology, data, standards, and best practices to connect the real and digital worlds for the benefit of all. And we're the hosts of today's symposium. And thanks for having us, being part of this great panel. Besides these amazing, inspiring people, I'm really excited to be part of this session.
Well, let's jump right in. Sanchari, being our privacy guru of the crew today, explain to us what you see or how you see the need for privacy evolving with the maturity of new age technologies and with the test beds and all of the initiatives that are forthcoming.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, April. And yes, so when we talk about new age technologies, right, AR, VR, MR, XR, which are like augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and extended reality, that started initially with the gaming culture as to make experience more robust and ubiquitous in nature. But what now has happened is now we are using these new age technologies not just for our like fun elements, which we are doing, which is great, but also to connect with the humans, to interact with each other. And now, as we know, because of this current situation, we are all connected online. So these kind of experiences really help us into learning more about the community, connecting with people, to commerce even. And sometimes I have seen even medical practitioners using it to engage the kids, right? So there is so much of data in addition to like what we talk about the user side, right? We have our medical information out there. We have our avatars out there, which has a lot of characteristics which probably we want to reflect in the avatars, right? So these are the things which probably we should definitely discuss about and learn more about these things. Because when we talk about privacy, I know a lot of people and a lot of people in my studies as well mentioned, oh, my data is out there. But when we actually kind of dig deeper into it, what type of data are we talking about? Is it just my name? Or is it like, if we are talking about medical things, my blood group as well, my other details? So when we talk about AR, VR, that is such kind of an individual experience that we give a lot of amount of data in there, and we need to learn what are the privacy expectations of users, how are we kind of evolving with it, because it's not just data security, it is also about data privacy. So I feel understanding the human component, as you mentioned, right, as we all mentioned in our introductions as well, is very critical, not just looking into from like the human perspective or just a technological perspective, but understanding what are their perceptions, what are they wanting, and so on. So that's how I kind of see privacy evolving in this realm as well.
And that's a great leeway into the next question of, privacy is such a vast concept, from the novice to those that are in it day in and day out.
Exactly.
Address more or narrow down more into the perceptions, the user perception of privacy and the importance of that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question as well. So I feel that when we are talking about privacy, it's a very individualized concept, right? What might be private information for me? For example, back in India, where I come from, medical information is definitely critical and they do their due diligence, but we sometimes share some data which probably is more private here, like, okay, I went to the doctors, I did this and so on, right? But which probably people here might not. So there are such nuances, like there is a cultural aspect as well that I think we should, that's why I think this panel is really interesting, because that kind of creates the conversation, right? For example, what I definitely recommend is, like, there is such rich data source in the world of academia as well as industry. I think we should all kind of come together and we start these discussions. For example, I think Kavya, who is going to introduce a bit more detailed framework later on. I don't want to like reveal all the information, but she as well as eminent researchers in the field have done an excellent job in addition something called privacy by design, which is a well-established concept in academia. And what they do is they have like some features, some characteristics based on which we can adhere to the privacy standards. But again, they also talk about people, for example, kind of opting in versus opting out versus what are their individual concepts and so on. So I think bringing all these together, starting these discussions, asking questions, and learning more about the users, not just from like, as you mentioned, like inclusivity is very important as well. Learning from a diverse population is also very important in terms
Right.
of perception.
And thank you for that. And that steers us perfectly into Joel, who will talk to us about the perspective from trust. And so we know that trust, Joel, is a fundamental principle for all users. If we don't trust it, we probably won't be using it or engaged in that particular platform. And you talked a bit in your introduction about your extensive research that you've done with human interaction and behavior, indirectly, specifically with trust. So, when we talk about your research, what is it revealed as to when, where, and even how to begin to accomplish this?
Sure. Thanks, April. Great question. And yeah, the interesting thing is I came about this almost backwards, right? So when I wrote the thesis, it was a little more what I'll call offensive in nature, right? So I was still on active duty at the time, very sort of national security mindset. And it was the thesis was focused on how do we build trust in environments so that I can then turn around and influence people's behaviors. And now I think the better piece, or the better way that different way I'm looking at that now, is really, okay, how do we protect the users, right? So I think from my perspective and the way I kind of look at this, I see three different areas that XR really three different focus areas, right? So it's you kind of have to look at it from a traditional IT perspective for start. There's the privacy issue, which Sanchari has been talking about here a little bit, but then there's that actual influence piece, right? Because it is kind of an immersive technology. But on the traditional IT, I want to play that down, but it's standard stuff, right? Like we should be designing that trust via security really into the hardware and software from the beginning, right? Build that in, get the users to trust, because as you mentioned, if I don't trust something, I'm not going to use it, right? And that's going to drive me sort of away from that product. On the privacy side, that trust really comes in when you're talking about how you're using my data, right? How are you collecting it? How are you storing it? If you're even storing it, and then how you're getting rid of it when you're done with it, or if you even are, right? And I think those are hugely important, and I think people are beginning to really kind of come around to that, right? Like paying a little bit more attention. The influence side is really interesting, right? Because I think it kind of flips the script a little bit and says, hey, it's not so much how do I trust the system, but it's a little bit more about me knowing that the trust I'm placing in the system is well placed, right? And so the other part to that though is that as a user, I may not be fully aware of the level of trust I'm placing in a system, right? Because a virtual or an immersive environment is man-made, right? Like it's my favorite saying that usually gets software engineers to roll their eyes is it's just ones and zeros, right? It's a collection of ones and zeros that we made so we can manipulate that environment, right? So the work that I did looked at a lot of social and psychological clues on how to manipulate that environment in a way to make not just the environment, but maybe another avatar very trustworthy, right? And so in that case, the user is placing their trust in the system, if you will, that may or may not be warranted.
And that entail leads us to even a safety perspective.
Sure.
Okay. So, Rodrigo, when we talk about the main difference between community design and community management, whether it's from a child perspective or a user at any age or level, or population perspective, describe the main difference. When we're dealing with developers, when we're dealing with the community at large, what is the main difference from inception to the end of community design and community management?
I think the answer will go very along the thought process of Sanchari and Joe. They talked about trust by design, privacy by design, but we don't discuss safety by design, right? And we know all those experiences right now are social experiments by the end of the day. And if you don't have this community design, which is translated into safety by design, what we have as a consequence is just a community building on top of what's out there. And we know sometimes the consequences are pretty damaging for players' experience in general, and especially for child, right? So the key idea here is before jumping into the development process itself, just give us some steps back and think about that, right? And think how can you design a preventive approach and consider the worst case scenario, right? And what are the actions that you have to put in place in order to prevent problems to happen in the first place, instead of just trying to mitigate and manage that down the road. The way we see the difference on this community design is exactly having these guardrails on safety perspective and well thought. And naturally, all the work done by community management down the road will be much easier. And they will be there basically to foster the positive experiences that we want to take out of those experiences.
Right. And it's something that we all need to consider, regardless of our level of experience or exposure. Mm-hmm. But let me ask you this as well, Rodrigo. Mm-hmm. In your world of safety, especially in the gaming perspective, what is a main challenge to further strengthen the preventive measures?
Yeah, I think the key challenge that we have in the industry right now is this mitigation mindset. So yes, I'm trying to understand whenever the problems are happening and try to identify and intervene. Of course, this is super important. But in the scale that we have in gaming right now, if you don't work on prevention, really managing the problems down the road is not scalable at all. And of course, everything that's mitigation driven, the damage is already done, right? So prevention is important. And this goes, again, trying to connect back with Sanchari points on privacy, right? How can we find this balance between anonymity and data privacy, right? So right now, a lot of bad actors are just relying on the strong anonymity elements that we have within games to misbehave and perpetrate these vicious cycles of scam, groomers, predators, abusers, harassing, bullying, and so on, because they are not really accountable by their acts. But on the other hand, we know that just collect a lot of data from users are not really good in the data privacy perspective, right? So how we find this balance between that, and that's exactly where we are spending most of our time, being this element, finding this balance, so users can be more accountable about what they do inside the platforms, but without compromising the data privacy they have and their rights about it.
Right, I agree, Rodrigo. One thing that we haven't talked about yet is accountability. From, as I mentioned before, from both extremes of developers and the users. But I want to come back to Joel a bit. And Rodrigo referred to the mitigation mindset. And Joel, because a lot of your research has been on influencing behaviors, can you talk a little bit more about that, either from the developer or user side, with your extensive experience and research has shown us?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, right? I mean, from, if it's part of the research that I did shows that you can, and I'll take this approach kind of to it here first, but I mean, you can build trust in immersive environments, right? Or in virtual environments, right? So I think we've kind of proven that, but it's a very fragile trust, right? I mean, it's one that can actually be broken really easily, and then takes a long time to build back, right? So, back when I was looking at it, the immersive environments weren't all that popular. So really the research was focused a little bit more around, what we now seem as commonplace since we're all on a video chat here, right, sitting on a panel, right? I mean, that wasn't all that commonplace back when I was looking at all this, but the research showed that, hey, we can come together as a group and build that trust and then be able to forward on activities, right? But again, it's a very fragile trust, and I think that would say that same concept still applies, right? So if the trust isn't there ahead of time and you don't have a good plan on how to maintain that trust, it is incredibly easy to break the trust. And that applies really whether it's, as I mentioned, across that traditional IT look, whether it's the privacy piece or the influence piece, right? I mean, it's there, but it's not hard to break, and it's a lot harder to get
And so,
back once you've broken it.
Right. Sorry, there was a little glitch there. Did you finish your thought there, Joel? Sorry about that.
I did, yeah. Yep,
Okay.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I just ended with. No, sorry, I was just going to say for you, I ended with, again, it's the trust may be hard to get back once you've broken it through an immersive sort of environment.
Right. Right. And so, equally important, we've already talked about the importance and the impact of distinctly and succinctly changing the mindsets when it deals with XR and cybersecurity, where privacy is involved, trust, safety, and now let's shift our focus to accessibility with Alina. And my question to start off with that is, accessibility has really, it's always been a factor, but it's really began to emerge as one of the primary factors with in extended reality. And so my question is, why is it key to building in a human-centered design, especially in reference to XR spatial computing?
I mean,
Alina.
What we just heard, just referring to what Sanchari and Joel and also Rodrigo and Tim tie into that, is basically the lessons we learned from the emergence of the internet here is that we need to keep the transient schemic attack as a foundation, right? While building the XR ecosystem to ensure that we not lose the grip on our realities as a result of losing trust in XR systems. So with immersive technologies, both the hardware and the software of XR should be customizable. So for all users and specifically for those with disabilities or special needs. So only then we can hope for an extended reality design and development that is generally human-centric and accounts for human limitations, whether temporary or permanently. So at the end, I mean, if we include and make hardware and software and the ecosystem that we build accessible to all, including people who are disabled, we basically are solving a broader issue and making it more accessible for all of the users.
Right.
So such a competition where basically time is crucial factor. Basically, I mean, this is something that we discovered, especially in the Bay Area. It's like, okay, we need to build fast and break things, right? But to be associated with the culture of care, companies need to develop, should remain aware of the risks associated with this, like build fast and break things. So with their services and take steps to prevent or counteract on those things that could happen when you actually build fast and break things. So the culture of care is basically a complex set of values and actions spanning from respect for standards and regulations to minimizing risks and preventing harm at the end. So it requires deliberate effort to put processes in place. Basically, we need to actually rethink a bit of that mindset from Silicon Valley of be fast and breaking things to promote a sense of care for humanity, as well as a broader awareness of the impact of these systems due to this sort of method. And then platforms and its effect on us all humans. So we need a culture that should arise from due diligence and internal integrity to ensure that the end products are accessible and that they do not compromise on the requirements of trust and safety or take away from it the factors of inclusion and diversity, which is really important. Especially when we're implementing AI deep learning, as those people who are feeding the AI is primarily just one sort of culture or one part of humanity, right?
Right. Right.
And
And
April, can I jump? Sorry, can I jump
yes,
in?
Joel.
So
Yes.
I think what when you hear across all sort of the five of us here that are talking, I mean, I think what you're seeing here, and when you talk about shifting the mindset, I mean, I think what people need to understand is this is a technology that is really a collection of other technologies plus human nature, right? And in a very intimate setting. Right. So, we started with our phones and they're very powerful and they're cool. And we started to lose a little bit of privacy there. I mean, prior to that, it was kind of the laptop and, but I mean, this is the first time where, in my opinion, that the security and the privacy and all the different, things, because we're now adding that human element as being an integral part of that technology. That's where I think we have to shift the mindset, right? Like we have to be able to look at it from more than just the traditional IT perspective or more than just the privacy perspective. I mean, we've got to have that holistic view of, hey, you're dealing with a person who is incredibly immersed in the product that they're using, right? So I don't get immersed in my laptop. Well, I mean, for the most part, I don't, right? But I mean, you can lose yourself, for lack of a better word, in VR, right? Or you can get so sort of focused on a heads-up display AR, right, that you're part of it, right? I mean, it's there, and then you're really, then you can actually, you're a part of it there. And so I think the idea is we've just got to be more mindful of the way we develop the technology itself and the applications that ride on top of it to make sure that we're taking care of the user, right? Like I think that's an important piece to note.
Right. Because at the very premise of it all, which is what we're bringing to the attention of our listeners today, is that it needs to be human-centric. And, on a personal side, in preparation for this panel, I thought about the first time I clearly realized the concept of inclusion as a person, as an African-American female who is in love with immersive technology. But I thought about the first time was in middle school. And I was participating in a spelling bee, and I actually had the opportunity to represent my school. And at that point in time, I wasn't. How do I put this? It wasn't a very inclusive environment for me, where I wasn't celebrated. I felt a lot of times where I wasn't seen. I mean, I was present. I was representing my class, but it wasn't appreciated, or I can't find the right word, but when I thought about the first instance of not feeling included, and when we tie that in with the human-centric perspective of that, when does it occur? Rodrigo, your company specifically looks at the age of appropriateness as a whole when dealing with extended reality or the gaming environment. But for me, at that young age, not feeling included that the factor of inclusion really changed the trajectory of how I viewed where I would go next, what environments I would participate in, or where I would share my data, or how private or secure I would feel or be in that next realm. Didn't know at that time it would be extended reality, but that it was where the trajectory of my psyche was forever shifted. So when we talk about the human-centric perspective, when, where, and how that occurs from the personal side, yes, as you mentioned, Joel, it is personal. It is individual. And then as all of us, from our perspective, expertise have alluded to that, even from the developer side, when does that occur? When does that shift in mindset allows everyone in this ecosystem to take a step back and realize, what is your role? What is the accountability factor? Or just releasing the next best, greatest thing? Or as OpenAI Cloud continues to launch and do the initiative globally with the test beds, we really need to take a moment and figure out, where does it begin? Where do we start? So the end result is truly diverse, is truly inclusive. And, whether that's accessibility, from privacy, trust, and safety, it's important that we let this be a starting point of shifting the mindset to taking that moment to realize that.
Yeah.
And I think just jumping into your comment, April, yes, we have to think about diverse experiences, and we have to acknowledge at the end of the day, going to the point that you mentioned, right, that those experiences right now are available for a wide range of ages, right?
Yeah.
With different levels of maturity to manage those experiences that are highly immersive and highly intense sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So having this mindset of how would you put a different persona within that experience whenever you are designing a solution, and how they would perceive that is so crucial for you to build out the guardrails and make sure that we are being inclusive. Or if this is not really designed for that kind of audience, what are you doing to make sure that this kind of audience is not just mistakenly being exposed to that experience? So if this content doesn't suit minors, for example, what are you really doing to make sure that it's not happening, right? Just don't try to blame the parents. Don't try to blame anything else, right? What you doing about it is super, super important. So great example that you brought in.
And it steers back to accountability. We do have one question from the audience, and I will ask that. So it says, but how do we make the users aware of the trust, Joel, that they are placing on a product? Are permission systems enough? And Joel, I'll let you lead, and anyone else that wants to chime in.
Yeah, thanks. And Michael, I guess that's a great question, right? I mean, and I don't know that there's an easy answer to that. I think when you start to look at the different things that you begin to trust, and so I'll take VR, I'll take AR as an example, right? So let's talk about all these sort of heads-up navigation systems that are showing up in cars, right? I mean, go back to when Apple Maps first came out and people were using it to navigate into the middle of a lake, right? Because they weren't verifying the information, right? That's one piece of trust that has to happen, and one that I think is going to be hugely important in AR, right? So as you start to use AR for technology for assistance, right, or for educational needs, right, there has to be a trust, there has to be a verification in there, right? But that's a different verification than, in VR, in another instance, right? Or a different level of trust, or a different type of trust in that the system is acting the way it's intended to act, right? And so I don't want to not answer the question, because it's really, there's a lot of ways to answer the question. And I think depending upon what part of the system you're looking at, that's going to determine how you verify that trust, right? But at the end of the day, and I think I saw some of this in the chat already, it's really transparency, right? I mean, that's one good way to start, right? To say, hey, here's the code, or here's what I'm doing, or here's my policy on data storage or data use. Tough one to answer. Lots of different ways to sort of look at that.
Yeah. And I would like to kind of chime in as well. So I would kind of explain in a way which motivated my research interest why we are looking into the user side. So I was actually seeing this particular health app, and this was meant for like women health, but there was like no option of like giving some certain women details, such as like the menstruation cycle or something like that. When I dug deeper into that, what I found was like the company which created it, that group did not have any women in that entire panel or developers group. So nobody thought about that. Oh, that can actually happen to women. So I feel this ties down to what we are discussing here, talking about diversity, inclusivity, as well as transparency. And kind of Joel mentioned it like really perfectly, but because we probably cannot immerse in the laptop. I can, sometimes I get, but AR, VR, these are like such immersive technology that we have to look into it. And when we are talking about the trust in general, it's not just about having, oh, it's fine, like, okay, trust is there, trust is not there, but people are still downloading, people are still using, but we have to make people accountable for what is happening. If there is a privacy breach, if there is a data security breach, then we have to keep it at least transparent for the users, right? Because when we are talking about user perception, and the question kind of really is well-rounded, because what do they expect? Like, do we talk about permission settings? Do we talk about, authorization? Actually, my dissertation is on authentication. So authentication is a big piece of chunk as well. But we also have to talk about regulations, right? Like how can we regulate these things? How can we build it into like, I was discussing about this panel to a friend and he just said that, oh, so what is the GDPR equivalent of AR/VR privacy? And unfortunately, we don't have these. So that's why I think we have to look into these things. And as I mentioned, briefly introduced, there is going to be more detailed session about it. But I think we have to keep digging deeper. We have to have proper regulations that companies cannot just say, okay, the data breach happened, we are sorry, let's just move on. We should not be working on that because as Rodrigo mentioned, right, we are talking about children data. Like these are very essential.
Mhm.
And as April, you mentioned, right, whatever happens in these building years, like these, suppose there has been a data breach of an avatar which I have created, and that has really like very important details about me, and that is forever out in the internet. So we have to be accountable for that. We have to be transparent, and we have to protect users' privacy in the way they want us to protect their data as well. And as Alina also mentioned, that's why we need the diverse sample. We have to not just look into like the convenience sample, but also look into other people's data sample, right? For example, people with visual impairments. How can we build AR/VR experience and protect their own user data for people who are having difficulty in accessing these technologies? So I think these are all very critical. And when we talk about trust, it's not just like the brand value, but also how we can help the users in general and build the trust through transparency and through accountability.
I'd just like to chime in one point that you mentioned, Sanchari, because since the panel is shifting the mindsets, right? I completely agree that regulations has a strong role in technology and we have to look at them properly. But sometimes people just look on regulations with their legal perspective, right? And they come up with several ways around on the plausible deniabilities and these kind of things. So even though I strongly believe on regulations, and I think we have to push for that, I think we really have to change the mindset on the developer side to make sure that's not lawyers that are drawing the way that we create human-centered experiences, right? Because otherwise, people just get creative in the way that they comply with regulations, but they are not really shifting the mindset and having the user concern on top of their minds. So yes, regulations are super important, but shifting, if we really shift the mindset, regulations will be a side effect. It's not a core industry driver.
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in on that as well. It shouldn't be not just only from a legal side, but also not from a marketing side, like just a feel-good thing.
Exactly.
Sort of, there's a huge opportunity there also to include visually impaired people into your team and really make them a part, because there is a huge opportunity with these emerging technologies to really build a better future for the benefit of all, and not waking up in 10 years in this like Black Mirror scenario.
Oh, yeah.
where we sort of gambled everything is now actually our chance to really rewrite the future here in this opportunity. And really also, I mean, I was quite surprised as when I read a recent study is there are so many developers out there who don't even know about accessibility, and they don't even know from their employer side that it needs to be a part or it needs to be thought of, and even from a standard itself. So I was quite surprised when I read the study about Unity developers having no clue about this. And there's one thing is to actually start is like really making sort of building a diverse team and really including them into the whole product development sort of process, from ideation, from concepting, over actually throughout the whole experience development cycle, from a software and a hardware perspective. I mean, people with turbans, women with ponytails, you can continue this discussion over and over, is like, because they're not part of the development process at all, because it's usually just one part of our culture, unfortunately.
And I'll just add to that, Alina. I was trying to find the word that was to explain the concept or perspective that I had, and it's an outlier. Okay, so and at times throughout my career, I was in the room, I was at the table or on the team or in the meeting, sitting in that class, but I was not part of the equation, literally. So you know, we're our theme is to shift the mindset. So go there with me. So you know, in part of the equation, if it's not inclusion, is not a part of the equation, then there's no equity. There's definitely lack of equality, and there's less empathy. We haven't talked about that term. There's less empathy within the industry as a whole. So it essentially creates a false narrative for the industry, for the developers, that all is a-okay, but when in fact it is not.
Yeah.
So yes, Sanchari.
Yeah, and I feel that what we are discussing here is very important, what Rodrigo kind of mentioned as well, and then we kind of clubbed in together, because I feel not just the legal perspective, but actually changing the mindset, actually making people care for the users. It's not just about just building the technology, developing an app and have the first product out there, but actually developing products where people can, first of all, what Joel mentioned, like people can trust, right? And for that, we need like inclusive teams, actually changing the mindset of the developers, the organizations, the users, everybody, right? When we talk about users, it's not just the end users, but everybody involved in that. And for that, a lot of I also work in the developer security education research area, and a lot of developers have expressed that they sometimes don't have any proper framework or proper guidelines what to follow. Like they want to care about the users, but then what to do? Okay, do I have secure or robust authentication, or do I have just encrypt the data? So they don't know these things, or how to address the user's concerns. So definitely what we are talking about, shifting the mindset, building more inclusive teams, is definitely more important. But I also feel, in addition to that, not just from the legal perspective, but giving them actually the framework, that kind of what they want to follow, if they want to have privacy preserving techniques. For example, the one which I talked about, privacy by design, they talk about, the researcher talks about privacy as a default setting. So how does it actually look in an AR, VR, MR context? Because it's very diverse, it's immersive, right? So I think these are a few things which we have to particularly focus on.
I agree. I do want to make sure that we allow time for those that may have questions, but I do want to kind of do a rapid one word wrap up for all of our presenters. Anyone can jump in, or actually I'll just say that as far as inclusion, we don't want to be an outlier. We want to be included. Anyone else jump in, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. Anyone from the panel, your one word wrap up or topic or theme?
Preventive mindset, please.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in. And I would say, for as cliche as it is, trust but verify.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I would like to address inclusive privacy and security. That is something which I definitely want to promote.
Alina?
You caught me off guard.
Oh. I'm trying to scroll through and see if we missed any questions.
Privacy, accessible, aware users and developers, community, industry. That is actually agile, because we also don't know the long-term effects these new emerging technologies have on us psychologically, but also physically, right?
Right. Well, we do have more time, but I just wanted to bring it all home to the fact that we specifically chose the title of this panel to be Shifting the Mindsets in Spatial Computing and XR. The XRSI specifically chose these esteemed panelists because of their expertise in privacy, trust, safety, accessibility, and inclusion. And we hope that prior to coming, each of the audience members ask themselves, why do we need to shift the mindsets? And we hope that at this point, we've helped answer that question. It is about accountability. It's the ethical thing to do. It is about protecting the safety and security, regardless of the age or demographic or type of population that is assessing it and are in that ecosystem. And so that is the foundation of the creation of the XR Safety Initiative. One thing that I do and cannot forget to do is to mention that please stay tuned for the upcoming keynote by the CEO and founder of the XR Safety Initiative, or XRSI, Kavya Perlman. And we're proud about what she is going to be releasing, launching, birthing to this spatial community, spatial computing community or ecosystem. And you can see all of us shaking our heads. We put in the blood, sweat, and tears, and definite time into just elaborating on what we spoke on today. And so, as you can tell from all of the panelists, that it is near and dear to our hearts. And as this is emerging and evolving, that we are happy to be a part of it and have had been a part of it. And as we mentioned before, from the conception, from the iteration to whatever the completion will be or look like. So I'm seeing if we have any other comments or questions in the chat room. But I just wanted to make that point that building this emerging ecosystem of the future of computing, it's critical that everyone feels welcome and that everyone feels safe. And I know that may sound a little cliche-ish or, pie in the sky, but as you can see, and I hope that we have helped to shift the mindset into understanding that that is critical, that they are critical principles in order for us to move forward in the right way. Do any of you all want to, let's see here. Are we not sure on the time here? I think that, and Alina, if you can confirm that we are, okay. So I do want to thank all of the audience members for joining us today. And a special note to Alina, Sanchari, Joel, and Rodrigo for joining us for the panel today. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe out there. See you soon.